Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Well, it's been another big week for macro news events. Cryptocurrencies mainly in the red, apart from Tron having a big week. I'll talk about a trade we had there as well, tying it all together for you as always. But first, we have launched our cryptocurrency educational units. Thanks for the feedback. You guys are loving this. They're going to be standard every week, and we're going to cover all sorts of topics from trading to greater financial education. And this week, how often can you realistically expect to make money? Into the crypto history. So last year was that $500 million NEM hack. 2 years ago now, since Chinese exchanges ended those no-fee wash tradings with 100 times leverage. So with no fees, people were just in and out to wash money, and that really was cracked down by the Chinese government. 2016, the ATO squad did probe Craig Wright after a few claims he made, and 4 years now since Coinbase launched that first regulated Bitcoin exchange in the US. 5 years since Charlie Shrem was arrested for his involvement in Silk Road doings. Into the global news, and the government shutdown has come to an end, but only temporarily. So within 21 days, they're going to try and settle some things and get some funding for this bill and whatnot. But if not, it goes back to government shutdown. So it's going to be interesting to see if this is temporary or there can be a resolution found. But I want to talk about government and trust, corporations, all that sort of thing in this segment today. So we saw MasterCard get slapped with this massive fine, $650 million, overcharging customers, all that sort of usual stuff that we see. This week we saw rumors that Apple supplier Foxconn might be laying off. We all saw that Apple are going to stop reporting the number of unit sales for iPads and iPhones and so on. This is all just showing us that global trade is slowing down. It's not just little pockets. It is a broader theme, as well as the stats we see coming out of China directly. On top of that, when these companies are looking at making less money, well, they've got a couple of options. They either cut staff, as we just saw, or raise prices. And Netflix are talking about hiking the price for their streaming service as well. So this is all just evidence that companies are trying to find ways to increase their profits. On top of that, we see the Brexit deal being crushed by the biggest ever defeat margin, and people aren't happy. We've continued to see this play out. The EU really want to make an example of whatever happens in Brexit. They don't want this to be a walk in the park so other countries can think that, hey, we can just leave the EU as well and we're still going to be on good trade terms. So this is why they're really making them hard for to leave. On top of that, we see the yellow vest for the 11th straight weeks now. These rallies continue. People realize that they have a voice and they can make a difference by taking to the streets. We have the internet now, different means of communication. So it's really interesting to watch this all unfold. I'm going to tie this all together in just a second. In Venezuela, the self-proclaimed acting president says he's, Bitcoin friendly, but again, in Venezuela, what do we know? They've got the largest proven oil reserves in the world. It's no wonder the US have currently got, this coup that continues to this day. It always comes back to the money, the oil, and the resources. Speaking of Venezuela, they did try to get their gold back home, $1.2 billion worth, and sure enough, the UK, the US lobbied this as well. The global police guys, this theme continues, and they've said, no, you can't have your gold back. So the saying in crypto is not your keys, not your coins. Well, similar, I guess, now with gold. If you don't have it under your own custody, that gold is not yours, and who knows if it's already been leased out to other people and so on. Now, why are people wanting to get their gold returned home? We see this in Russia and China and people stockpiling record amounts. This is the Aussie dollar price of gold, and this is a weekly chart. It's been in an uptrend for 10 years. Technical patterns here. This is a nice sort of ascending triangle that's broken out, but gold has just broken out slightly here to record all-time highs in Aussie dollars. I've touched on this before. It's a leading indicator that a lot of fiat currencies are weakening against assets like gold. So although in US terms, I've spoken about gold a year or so ago now. I'm going to do another special episode soon about breaking this downtrend line, coming back and test it, and we might be about to break out. If we can get over these levels here, sort of 1350-ish, I think gold is really going to be on the radar for a lot of investors, and it's this large narrative that I've spoken about, central banks, what they can do. I think this is going to be a big narrative going forward, something to watch, something I'll continue to cover. But tying this all together is trust. And here is the forecast of the US 10-year bond yield. So every year we have these dot plots, the professionals, the government experts. They always promise that things are going to get better. We're going to raise interest rates next year. The economy is really strong. And look, sure enough, here's the black line. What actually happened? Every year, interest rates just go lower and lower, and every year they say, oh, it'll get better next year. We're raising interest rates. And the one thing that I said months ago that will save the stock market is when the Fed backs off and says, hey, maybe we're not going to actually raise interest rates, because the market has a tantrum. There was a real standoff, and the Fed raised rates more aggressively than the market would have liked. That's why we saw that huge correction. And now, sure enough, again, they're coming out and saying, look, we might be closer to ending our rate rises than we think. Not only that, all that money printing and QE that we did to buy up the bonds, well, we're going to undo that. They're calling this quantitative tightening. They're going to undo that balance sheet. And I don't think they can. And sure enough, they're already talking about ending any attempt to sell all those bonds and those assets on their balance sheet back into the market, because there's just not the capacity. They bought it with money they printed out of thin air, and now no one wants to buy that off them. And I think this is the biggest macro trend, the biggest trade of our lifetime. Now, tying this all together, what is the root cause of all these stories? Well, it's trust. As I posted to Reddit here, look at the industries that have just got record levels of distrust. Congress, business executives, and particularly bankers, but journalism. What we're told, just be a sheep, do what you're told, don't question anything. This narrative is really starting to change, and people are waking up to this. And as we see here, it's going to be interesting if we're even allowed to talk about this. So YouTube are changing their algorithm, and what is going to be deemed conspiracy theory? Are my videos talking about some alternate things? Is that going to fall into that category? We just don't know. And we're already seeing all these different platforms really crack down on their users. So it'd be interesting to see if we're allowed to continue to talk about these topics. But on to the crypto news. So Power Ledger struck a deal in Japan, 55,000 properties by 2020, a huge deal. We love renewables, homegrown company Power Ledger. It's great to see them continue to make progress. In the STO world now, so T0 have launched their security token trading, and this is more for accredited investors, but there are others out there, guys, where you don't have to be accredited. So I've done my episodes on which platforms I like, what I'm watching for good STOs, but there are others you can sign up to, Open Finance Network, Spice, and so on, where I don't believe you even have to be accredited. Some good news for Ripple holders. So a lot of people sort of know that I'm not a long-term investor in Ripple, but I believe that whether or not they use XRP tokens in this interbank settlement is going to be the deciding factor for Ripple's success. Now, it's reported that Ripple sold $500 million worth of XRP tokens in 2018. So that's a step in the right direction if you're a Ripple holder. But there's another story this week coming out about the Ripple market cap being misleading. So what they're saying here is that a lot of that supply that's out there is actually locked up or escrowed, so people can't sell it. So it's not really in circulating supply, and that falsely inflates the market cap. Now, Ripple would still be, a top number 2 or 3 coin, even if we do take out those coins that were proposed in this article. But there was some really harsh feedback, and I'm not sure if you guys have noticed it, but there's really an XRP army out there. I'm not sure if they're all bots, if these people are genuinely out for blood, but there's some really threatening remarks for the gentleman in particular that conducted this research, and that's not what we want to see in this space. One thing that I literally started Nuggets News for was to have open and honest debate in a respectful manner, particularly in our premium group, about different coins. You never get to the bottom of any issue without listening to both sides of a debate. Good news for Polymath token holders. Along the same lines, we want to know what the circulating supply is, how many tokens are going to come into the market in the future. So a step in the right direction as Polymath decided to lock up 75 million more tokens. Polymath, another one I'm watching for the STO space. Now, I'm sure we all wish that we had another $250 million to inject into the market at these levels, but that's what Mike Novogratz has done. So a lot of these crypto funds got on board at the exact wrong time. So if you're feeling bad as an investor about getting in the wrong time, some of these big money managers put their clients' money to the tunes of $100 millions in at the top of the bull market. They're now sitting on massive losses. So they're doing more raises because they believe now is a far better entry point. So it's good to see billionaire Mike Novogratz still having the confidence of his investors to inject more capital into the crypto markets at these levels. A lot of projects are running out of runway, whether that be the developers themselves or just the money that they've got. So we know that Polkadot had a lot of money escrowed in that parity wallet that fell victim to that bug. So Ethereum Foundation is giving out some grants. They're doing another ICO to raise another $60 million. Look, guys, I love Polkadot, but I'm not necessarily going to be investing in this one if it brings the value of all tokens to over $1 billion. That's a lot of circulating supply, and doing another raise. Other options companies have are selling equity in the company itself, getting that venture capital funding and so on. And we're going to see this happen a lot. I've done episodes about the options that ICOs have as they run out of money. We're seeing that take place now. This was great to get some endorsement from CZ. I put a lot of research into my fundamental analysis. Please check that out if you haven't already. I believe Binance is going to be one of the best projects and tokens if they launch the DEX and get into the STO space, do everything that they've promised. Please check out that video if you haven't already. As I said, the Ethereum Foundation are giving out a lot of grants, but also they want some stability. So a lot of workers that were getting paid in ETH from ICOs and so on have seen their holdings drop 90% if they didn't sell. So DAI just continues to get better and better. And we're seeing DAI being paid throughout a lot of work that's getting done in Europe, but now the Ethereum Foundation as well, Request Network. This is all coming together, the good projects. I've got my Maker t-shirt on today. We first covered that one at $30 and it continues to power on. So this was interesting to see Andreas comment on Maker as well. So saying that a lot of stable coins are meh, as he describes it there, and then saying, well, actually, yeah, DAI is really interesting concept, a stable coin that's decentralized. That's why I like Maker. That's why I like Haven that have just rebranded to Synthetics, and that's not to be confused with Haven with 1V that recently has been in the news as possibly exit scamming. Z-Snarks, we've spoken about this before. Plasma, there's a lot of scaling on the roadmap for Ethereum. I'm going to do a full episode about this very soon, but the Z-Snarks that give the capacity of the network a big boost up to 500 transactions per second. This is now launched on the testnet. So these things are getting closer and closer. But I don't want to talk about this too much because a lot of people are not aware that Ethereum 2.0 is coming. And this is going to be an entirely new chain. The Beacon chain, you're going to have Beacon ETH. You're going to be able to lock that up for proof of stake and earn rewards. So I'm going to do a deep dive into all that for you guys because I think a lot of people are just not even aware that there's going to be two separate Ethereum chains and you're not going to lose value. They're not going to issue more ETH to do that. And I'll explain all that in the coming video. So South Korea's largest exchange, Bithumb, possibly going public on the US stock market. Now they're talking about doing this as a reverse merger. So they buy another company that's already listed to get all those licenses and whatnot. But again, it's just this fight for market share on Wall Street for those big investors. And it really is just the really big boys that are left now. So we saw a lot of smaller exchanges trying to come online. I don't know how any of them are surviving. I think we're going to lose more. But it's really these top 2 or 3 exchanges that are fighting to capture all that market share now. Now this week we had the Bitcoin ETF withdrawn. Now partially due to government shutdown, they're saying, I jumped on live at the time, guys. Make sure you've got that little notification bell clicked. I always try to jump on live when there's big news events. This was a little bit disappointing. A lot of people have hang their hat on the hopes of getting an ETF. Look, you know my personal feelings. I'm not too fussed about this. I want real world adoption and use case, but this isn't end of the world. Just simply withdrawn it by now. They believe they're going in the right direction with regulators, but check out that video if you want full details about what went down there with this SIBO exchange getting that proposal withdrawn. That isn't the only ETF. So we saw the paperwork for Bitwise being filed. We know the Winklevoss twins are still pushing for it. We know that there's ETNs overseas. Japan wants an ETF. Everyone wants to be first. It's just a matter of who can get this paperwork over the line. So there's still people out there fighting, battling to get an ETF if you're one of those people that are really looking forward to that happening. Now, this week we saw some of the big boys, the JP Morgans of the world, come out and give their low price targets. And it's just interesting that during that bull market, we see these big outlandish targets, $100,000 Bitcoin. And I think, it has to be said, we're somewhere nearer the bottom than the top now. We've fallen so far. And we're starting to see these extremely bearish calls. So 1,200 by JP Morgan. No surprise that at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Bitcoin will go to zero. From these global leaders that control the world, is it any surprise that they're talking negatively about Bitcoin? I don't think so. Joe Rogans of the world, these people now have more influence than what happens at Davos with all the elites out there. And this is really powerful, the force of the internet. And this is what we're trying to bring through further decentralization and distribution of how we source news, trust, all that sort of thing, guys. So don't underestimate the pull that people like Joe Rogan have in a podcast when they talk about Bitcoin becoming a new sort of currency. Now, I'm not sure if I believe that that's going to happen straight away, but I've spoken about this a lot. And this stat is, I guess, slightly misleading, as people pointed out. So that 3.3 trillion that Bitcoin does, a lot of that is speculation and trading and so on. It's not all as a currency competing with Visa and MasterCard and so on. But these numbers are still significant. I think a lot of people would be surprised that Bitcoin is, doing this much even in comparison to PayPal. But I had a deep dive with Simon Dixon. This is one of the greatest interviews I've ever done. I was just amazed with the quality of Simon's responses. Such a smart guy. We talk about the store of value and then Bitcoin's ultimate mission of becoming a medium of exchange, how it gets there, his price targets and so on. Please check out that interview if you haven't already. On top of that, we've got so much to look forward to with Bitcoin. I know these names are a little bit confusing: Snore, Dandelion, Mast, Taproot, Mimblewimble. I'll cover all these in detail in the future, but there's so many possibilities. The future is bright for Bitcoin. I'm here for you guys. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to continue. I just don't see how Bitcoin cannot grow in the future with everything that's happening. And finally, some really big news. We know how many million or billion users Samsung have, and photos of the new S10 leaked showing that a Bitcoin wallet, an Ethereum wallet. Imagine this being under the nose of every user of a smartphone. It just brings that legitimacy. And then obviously it's a race. Other phone producers want to have a built-in wallet. Now these are going to be not the same as Ledger in terms of custody and holding your own coins. I'm not sure if it's an entirely custodial wallet, danger of being hacked, all that sort of thing, guys, but it's a step in the right direction of getting cryptocurrency to the masses. So before we get into the technicals, I just want to talk about this trade idea I shared with members over a week ago now. So it was to buy BNB and a buy signal on Tron. So at the moment, a lot of people are telling me that fundamentals don't really matter. Well, I think there's still instances where altcoins are going up, as I've been talking about, based on fundamentals. Now, the BitTorrent token is happening on that Binance Launchpad, and I thought it was going to be really bullish because you can only buy it with Tron or BNB token. Now, both of these have performed well. Binance is about 10% up since this date, but since we shared this on the 18th here, Tron has moved back into the moving averages nicely and had a nice, you're up 30% if you entered here as well. So it's good to know that you can still get these little pockets of trades. I'd get in and out. This was my time frame here leading into the 28th, and it's often buy the rumor, sell the news. So if you've made some profits, it'd almost be worthwhile watching if you can flip this and short, because often when we have these big run-ups leading into an event, they can sell off hard as well. So I'll be watching the charts for another trade there on Tron. On to the Bitcoin technicals just here. So last week, guys, we were looking at whether or not we can get through these moving averages, and a couple of things to note. So a lot of people have pointed out this really longer term downtrend, and it's only got a couple of touch points here. People are drawing these different ways, but we did have a quite significant break when we burst through here at the time. We had a nice green candle on the hourly, which we hadn't seen. But if we look down here, it just hasn't been convincing. This volume is decreasing. That's not what we want if we're going to break down trend lines and moving averages. And sure enough, we've got into these, kissed it, and been rejected pretty strongly. So again, unfortunately, I have to remain with my negative bias at this stage. And this is pushing down into the 31st of January. So the bullish scenario would be if we can retest this and then bounce strongly off that longer term downtrend line somewhere around this date. And it's funny how these dates continue to line up, because we will be in the longest Bitcoin bear market of all time on February 2nd if this bear market continues. Now, if we can get a big push up on February 1st, as is due here, we won't break that record. So let's see how that unfolds. As we know, other than a few pockets here and there, the whole market remains at the mercy of Bitcoin. And finally, I just want to leave you with this thought. So I believe the greatest macro trend of our lifetimes will be betting against that central bank and all their ability to normalize these conditions, because what they did with printing money and lowering interest rates, encouraging people to speculate and go into record amounts of debt, it artificially inflated global asset prices. And I believe that gold and Bitcoin are going to be the big beneficiaries when people realize that they can't undo all this. And obviously this is why I'm so passionate. It's why I started a community to help people capitalize on what I believe might be one of the greatest opportunities of our lifetime. So please head to nuggetsnews.com.au if you want to join us in becoming a member. Otherwise, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, share these videos around, and thanks for tuning in, guys. Cheers.